Oh, I'm
All good.
excited. Let's do it.
Cool. So, yeah, I was just going to introduce myself. My name is Kate Strong. Today, I'm known as a world champion in triathlon. I've summited Mont Blanc. I was an aerospace engineer and finished quite a few Ironman. Yet, I wanted to also talk about the dark side as well, because it's very easy to look at successful people and see all of the glory and not realize that behind every mountain, there's also a shadow that sits behind the mountains. And one of my biggest intentions in my life isn't for people to look at me and get wow. I want people to look at me and see the greatness in themselves shining through as well. So whenever I'm talking, I will do my best to also open up the shadows that I had to overcome and also embrace in order for me to see the strength within myself to become who you see today. So I come from an ordinary family. I'm a Welsh girl. I live with my parents and a younger brother. And to all intents and purposes, it was a pleasant lifestyle. I had nothing to rebel against. So there was no trauma, there was no poverty. I lived in a life of simple and ease. As I said, it was quite ordinary. Yet sometimes when we're in our comfort zones and from a space of comfort, we've got nothing to fight against. There was nothing for me to step up and be extraordinary. Yet I knew somewhere in my heart that I was meant for more than this life. I was meant for more than just what was presented to me. And for me, that moment happened when I was 12. I was watching television and an advert came on for a charity, and I saw some kids starving in Africa. And the one child impacted me the most because they had some flies in their eyes and they were so weak they couldn't even move the flies. And I just broke down because that's the first time I ever saw pain and suffering in the world. Now, looking back, as Gary was saying, I look back with gratitude because up until that point, I'd never even been exposed to poverty, let alone what pain was. But in that moment, I decided, maybe not as eloquently as I'm about to explain, but I decided that if I couldn't positively impact the world, I would minimize the negative impact. And so with that very small decision at such a young age, that pretty much defined my trajectory for the rest of my life. And it's very easy in our lives to think we've all got it together. But as Steve Jobs said, we can't connect the dots looking forwards. We can always only connect the dots looking backwards. So my life was always a polka dot and cluster of mishmash of ideas. And now I can see, standing in front of you, as I said, as that world champion triathlete, as well as enabling other companies to find success through sustainability and helping individuals remove the glass ceiling off their potential. I can see how all the dots joined up for me to be that way today. And so if it's okay with you, I'll take you on a journey of my life along there. And it's interesting because the whole world today seems that we've all come to a huge standstill. A few weeks ago, I could never have imagined my life would be completely changed and every single life in this entire world impacted. So what can we do about it? Because it's very easy for us to feel isolated. It's very easy for us to all think that I'm alone here, no one gets me, what about my job? We're all living in almost scarcity of fear of what's happening tomorrow. There was just an announcement today from the UK to say we're here for another 3 weeks. Don't expect any more changes. Yet we don't know what's going to happen after that. But there's one thing that we all have in common. We may not know what's going to happen outside. We don't know what the government's going to say. We don't know what our employer is going to do tomorrow. Will we be made redundant? But we have something within us. And that is the one thing we can always depend on. And for me, the reason I bring this up now is because I learned that lesson back in 2012. So as I said, when I was young, I always felt I had something more to give, yet I didn't know what that was. And I had an unrelenting desire to also fit in, though I always felt a little bit outside of circles and communities. So I did my best to conform. Instead of being the rebel and doing what I wanted, I did everything to please community, to please my parents. I was the good daughter. I went to university. I got some of the best grades. And I always made sure I satisfied their wish for me. because I always felt a little bit different. And maybe in your life, you notice that you put other people's desires first, ahead of your own. Maybe it's also for society. How many of us actually sit down and question what we do on a daily basis? Do we do it because we choose to? Or do we do it because it's expected of us and we've never asked why? Do you wear your watch on your left hand? Who told you why to do that? Why not the right? Or a stupid example, why do we put clothes on in the morning? It's the most unnatural thing to do, is to cover our natural body. Yet society is unquestioned for us to go outside the door without any clothes on. There are certain things we do every single day that we don't ever question. So when we're told that our entire world is changing, we don't question it. And so on this talk and this journey, I'd like to plant the seed with you to start questioning why we're doing certain things. Why do we take for granted certain elements of our lives and others we don't? What could we upskill and what could we replace as well? So a lot of us wait for cliff edges to make these decisions, like the proverbial cliff edge moment. We go to the doctors and we get a diagnosis that we either need to dramatically change our lifestyle or a worst case scenario. Or our partner sits us down and says, unless you change and stop going to the pub and start caring about me more, I'm going to leave you. So why do we wait till the moment of almost break point before making those choices? Well, I didn't know the answer because I kept playing societal satisfaction tick list. I'd got a degree, tick. I went traveling, tick. I got my partner. I was dating a guy from Wales at the time, tick. We'd moved to Australia, bought a house. We were going to get married. I was doing everything right. Yet something inside of me kept saying, you've given up. On the outside, it all looked fine. As I said, we had a beautiful home. We were running a guest house together. And from outside, we lived a perfect lifestyle. Yet every evening I was going home with this knot in my stomach. Something just wasn't sitting right. And it took me until a cliff edge moment to realize what it was. So Gary mentioned just before I started this talk that it was quite a toxic relationship. And I stand here as Kate Strong with Strong in my name. And even I can't believe where I was before. Yet there's a very sad but a great metaphor for this, which is if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll immediately jump out. Yet if you put a frog in cold water and slowly bring the temperature up, you can boil the frog alive. And I was that frog. When I'd met my partner 9 years prior to that cliff edge moment, it was an okay relationship. We got on fine or good enough to satisfy the tick list. Again, there was nothing to stand against. Yet over time, gradually, my self-belief started to be corroded. And it was partly because of the way he talked to me, and I allowed him to talk to me like that as well. And it got to a point where there was also physical abuse, and I was landlocked. So he had an app on my phone, and anytime I left my property, he would call me to ask me where I was going. So pretty much I was isolated in a rural village of Australia with 2,000 people, living in a house that I wasn't allowed to leave without permission. And 6 days before our wedding, I got the best and the worst moment of my life. And it happened on a cliff edge. We just had an argument and I followed my ex to the edge of a cliff where we lived. And he said, unless my father forgave him, he would throw himself off the cliff and kill himself. And at that time, I could see the emotional pressure that I was being put under by him, and it was a pure mind game. Now, I've never actually shared that part of my story before, so I apologize, it's quite emotional. But I think it's really important because a lot of us don't see abuse as just words, but sometimes words can hurt more than a bruise or a slap. And the words he was using against me was emotionally suppressing me, putting a lot of guilt on myself to the point where I self-doubted every single thing. And that day, that day he threatened to take his life yet again because of something he said I did, was when I decided that I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't live in fear that my actions were going to hurt someone else, and I was that bad a person. And so we broke up. Breaking up was the hardest thing in my life, because if you think about it, I didn't have any faith in myself. I didn't have any trust in who I was. I was borderline eating disorder, because everything had to be so perfect. I needed the chiseled look. I needed the perfect selfie. I needed everything's fine. I needed the great body, because I couldn't show any space, any fear, any space of imperfection, because I was afraid that somebody would see it and everything would come crashing down. So when he left me, he also left me with $1 million debt and a lawsuit. And also remembering I was isolated in Australia. So I was halfway around the world from all my friends and family. So I had two choices. Standing at that cliff edge, I could either play victim to everything that was happening around me, to lay down, go for bankruptcy, say it wasn't my fault, take up excessive drinking and bury the problem and become quite bitter about it. Or I could choose a path to find myself again. And so I chose the latter. I chose to make that day a day to see how strong I could actually be. Ironically, I was born strong. My name is Kate Strong, yet I'd always coupled vulnerability with weakness. I couldn't be weak, so I would never show my vulnerability. I would never let anyone get close to me to see my suffering, or any point that I couldn't do it myself, because I was afraid of being hurt or afraid of losing my name. So that day I decided to embrace the vulnerability of being strong. And when I came back home, I told my friends what had happened, and they decided to support me through that. Of course, it's funny, isn't it? The amount of times I'm afraid to ask for help, yet when my friends turn to me, I adore supporting them. I will bend over backwards to help them any way I can, yet I won't give them the same gift in return to help me. So that day I turned to my friends and just cried. There was nothing else I could do. But I was still faced with the reality of running a business by myself with no confidence that I could do it, as well as a real financial debt, and my ex still on my back, phoning me, threatening me, and sending lawsuits about taking the business off me. And I needed to deal with that. And just like climbing a mountain, if we look at Everest, there is no way I could have ever imagined climbing that summit of the enormity in one fell swoop, in one giant leap. But I knew if I woke up every single day, that's all I needed to do. Wake up and get through another day. I would get one step closer to my exit, my Everest. So that's what I did. For the first few months, I just focused on waking up every single day and proving that I could survive through this. And then as soon as survival became the norm, I could grow a little bit further. And that was, could I look at myself in the mirror? Could I look at myself in the mirror without that voice in my head saying, God, you're so ugly. Look at the lines beneath your eyes. You know, look at this, you know, pimple or spot, or look at these bones or the wobbly bit. I just needed to look at myself without hating myself. And then hate grew to acceptance. And eventually acceptance started to be love. There were parts of me that I could appreciate. Yes, I had wrinkles in my eyes, but that just showed I smiled. You know, the frowns on my face showed I cared, and I was worried for my friends. So I started to see myself in a different light. I could own all of me. And when that step of self-acceptance, I could then spiral out a little further and start dreaming, because I needed a stability first. I needed to build my foundations of knowing who I am, of accepting who I am. So if my friends reached out and offered support or advice, I was in a position to receive. If someone gave me a compliment, instead of immediately batting it back and saying, no, you're a liar, don't believe you, I could absorb it. So once I was able to start appreciating myself, I was then able to start considering what else is possible in my life. For far too long, I put myself last. I wasn't even on the list. I was looking after the business. I was looking after my partner. I was looking after my family. I was looking after everyone else but myself. So sitting down, I asked myself one question. What one dream could I set purely for myself, not for anyone else, purely selfish? What did I always want to do? And it reminded me of a time back in 2003. I'd gone traveling for a year after graduating from university, and sitting on top of a mountain in Guatemala, watching the sunrise from the highest peak in Central America, I randomly met a girl called Katie too, and she was from America. And as we were sitting there watching the sunrise together, she turned to me and said, "Do you know what? This time next year, I'm going to be an Ironman." Now, I'd never heard of Ironman before and assumed she was going to morph into a transformer and take on a half machine body. Yet she quickly informed me that an Ironman is an ultra triathlon. It's a 2.4 mile swim followed by a 112-mile bike ride, finished off by a marathon, a 26.2-mile run. At that day in 2003, I thought it was crazy. How could someone imagine doing all that? I could barely swim 2.4 miles, let alone run a marathon afterwards. Yet on that mountain summit, a seed had been planted. And fast forwarding back to 2013, when I was sitting there searching for something for me to have purely for myself, I thought, well, seeing my life is so crappy, why not aim for something I never even thought possible? Why not aim to be an Ironman? And as I was sitting there, I noticed a little voice in my head. It was obviously me talking myself out of it. But the voice said to me, "Don't try and do an Ironman, just settle for a half." And I realized this voice had been running my show all my life. Whenever I wanted to do something for me, I'd halve it or I'd aim a little less. If I did it for others, it was a different story. But for myself, if I wanted to run 10 kilometers, I'd say, just finish it. You'll do well. I never strived to see how far I could go. It's as if this little voice in my head had always put a glass ceiling on my potential, most probably for security, keeping me safe, keeping me in my comfort zone. Yet this glass ceiling, what was it locking out of me? It was locking out the potential to see how great I could be. And so once I'd heard that voice of security, again, capping my potential, I decided if I was going to aim for something, I needed to make sure I was aiming to be my best. So if I wanted to do a triathlon, I had to aim for number one, because anything less would be capping my potential. I didn't want to be the best and smash everyone and prove so-and-so wrong. I just wanted to allow myself to shine, to see how far I could go. And so I set my goal. I wanted to be number one in triathlon in the world. Also, something interestingly happened there. And maybe you can look at this in your life. If someone offers you an opportunity or something different, what's your immediate reaction? Do you say yes or do you say no? For most of my time, my immediate reaction was no, because I knew the answer. Whilst I was with my ex, he would never let me do anything that was outside of work hours, just in case I was needed on call in business. And I wasn't allowed to do it during work hours either. So my default answer had always been no. And I'd always used my ex as the excuse not to try new things. So in 2013, I also set a goal for myself. I would always say yes to my friends when they offered me an opportunity, because I couldn't have it both ways. I couldn't call myself someone in need, yet know it all when people tell me that I'm good at something. So I had to start believing in them. If they said, "Oh, you'd be great at swimming," I'd say yes and give it a go. Or you'd be great at rock climbing. I'd say yes and give it a go. And one evening, a lady turned to me. I was in the local bar and she said, wow, you'd be a great public speaker. I was never comfortable speaking in front of people. And even the thought of talking in public used to give me a knot in my stomach. Even here, actually, to tell you the truth, I still have that knot in the stomach. I've transformed it into knowing that it's because I care, but before it almost paralyzed me from speaking. But as soon as she said it, and I'd already said I'd have to say yes, my response was yes. And 2 months after saying yes, I found myself on my first ever public speaking stage. And that was a TEDx talk in Sydney. And in front of a live audience, I thought, well, if I'm going to own my potential, if I'm going to own who I am, then now is the best time to do it. So standing on that stage, I publicly announced that I wanted to be #1 in the world in triathlon. Yet, I was also faced with quite a lot of challenges. One, I lived in a village of 2,000 people where my local swimming pool was only open 4 months of the year. Two, I didn't own any form of transport and our train only ran once every 2 hours to get to the local swimming pool. Three, I didn't own a bike. Four, I was also working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week in my guest house, making sure I paid off all the debt that I'd been left with. And five, I had no idea how to swim, cycle, or run the total distances that I needed to. But I knew, again, if I wanted to climb that mountain of becoming that Ironman triathlete, I needed to start that day. And so that was the day I committed to being #1 in the world. Now it's interesting because when we step outside our comfort zone, yes, it's scary for us, but something also happens to other people. When we start becoming closer and more connected to our purpose, we naturally allow people to explore their own sense of self, their own sense of purpose and their own direction. Some people may see this as a reflection on them as positive, that they can go, wow, that gives me permission to dream big for me too. So they go out and start accomplishing their own personal goals. Yet others might see it as a sign of reflection of resistance, that by me proving it's possible, it reflects on them that they didn't try, even if that wasn't my intention or our intention. So when I publicly announced this, I started to get some beautiful messages of friends who called me crazy, yet they would support me through this journey, whatever happened. And I had other people listing all the reasons why I'd fail. Now, we've always got a choice with who to listen, and everyone has an opinion, and every opinion is valid. The people with all the lists of judgments of reasons why we're not going to succeed, yes, every single point they said is true. Yet we don't have to believe the same point of view. So with those lists, I lovingly thanked them and I decided to upskill. Now, I didn't actually ever look up how to swim, cycle, or run. That wasn't my problem. My problem was time. As I said, I was working 12 hours a week, pretty much 7 days a week. 7 days a week, yeah, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. I also needed to fit in up to 35 hours a week of swimming, cycling, and running training, excluding commutes to get there. One of my biggest challenges was sleep. So whenever I face that big mountain, I break down all the elements of what I may need. What equipment am I short of? What equipment do I need? How can I increase my energy levels to make sure that I only operate off 4 hours of sleep a night, which is what I did for 2.5 years to achieve my goal? What food actually breaks down quicker and more effectively in my body, so my legs and arms and all my body that I've worked hard and broken down the muscles can repair itself, ready for just as hard a training session the next day. And also mental preparation. How can I believe in myself? How can I make sure that I'm mentally prepared to be able to accept whatever may happen on race day. I may not win. I may not even start, or I might win. How can I make sure I'm in a mentally strong position to cope with all possibilities? Something here I'd like to share is, today we are the result of our actions of yesterday's. So in the same formulation, tomorrow is the result of all our action of today. If we expect different results in the future, we need to make sure today is different from yesterday, otherwise nothing will change. In today, when I was training in triathlon, I made sure I pretty much questioned every single element of my life to make sure I was not the same person as yesterday. Sometimes I learned trial by error. So with the eating, I found certain foods that didn't work for me and others that did. And other things I stuck to with discipline, which was my sleep time. I didn't own a television, and I made sure I didn't download any apps on my computer or my phone that would distract me and waste time. I needed to make sure I became super efficient, because that was my pattern in the past of not being efficient. So by taking today, I made sure all my actions were in alignment with what a world champion would look like. And everything I did had to pass through that one question. Would a world champion do this? If the answer was no, I didn't do it. Now today, this very minute, I may not have such a strategic or such a big goal, but I make sure that I always keep those barrier questions open. You know, would I be proud of my actions today if I look back on them? Is this helping me work towards my goals or away from my goals? The question can apply whether we're aiming for Everest or we're aiming for our local hill. It's the same journey. It's one step in front of the other. So once I decided on the path I was taking, I knew I had to commit 100%. And that's what I did. I lived and breathed a world champion. I made sure everything was in alignment. And it's interesting through these processes, because fast forward 14 months, I found myself on Team Australia for World Championships. In one race, I'd won the national championships. And in that race, I shouldn't have actually been number one, because I woke up feeling pretty shitty. I was tired. My parents had stayed with me for 30 days, which meant I was sleeping on the floor on a blow-up mattress in my lounge. And 2 days before race day, we'd driven 14 hours for the race. And the swim was in a very choppy ocean. And the water was slopping all around me. I wasn't feeling very great. And someone had also knocked my goggles off. So as I was swimming, I was swallowing salt water. And I got out of the water, and in front of me, I saw a few bicycles missing. So when bicycles are missing, it means someone's on the path already. And so I applied something that I've learned today. So I'm also a Reiki master. I'm doing my best to get into my spirituality. And the one phrase is just for today. So my swim was crap, but I focused on just for today. I put it to the background, and I didn't drag the bad swim into my cycling. I got on my bicycle and said, just for the bike ride, I'm going to do my best. And I started cycling. So that's 112 miles, which is 180 kilometers. As I was cycling, the wind was blowing me from the side. I was leaning in. I was catching my breath. My water was going everywhere. I was unable to take water. We eat as well on the bicycle. I was also struggling to take food as well, because I was working harder. And so I wasn't digesting. I was feeling quite sick. And as I got back into transition where we put our bike down, I noticed that there were more bicycles in front of me than there were outside, meaning that there was already people running. And instead of beating myself up for not being good, I let it go and said, you did your best on the bike ride. Your best is what it is. Start running. And so just for today, or just for this moment, I focused on the running, and out I went. So the wind was blowing really hard. The sand was picking up and blowing in my face. It was burning my eyes. And I focused looking down, and it was four loops of the same circuit. My parents were there supporting me, and I wanted to give up. Yet I decided to keep going for my parents. They'd come that far. And I also wanted to do it for myself, to show to them that it was possible, that my dream wasn't crazy, that they had a reason to worry, but it wasn't a validation. They could let go of their little girl and let me shine. And as I was running down the pathway, I could see my mother on my left, and I turned to her and waved. But what I didn't see was behind me, a girl had stopped to talk to her friends. And as I passed her, I finished, and I finished first, just 3 seconds ahead of her, because she was actually leading. And that lesson taught me something very important, that we need to be in the moment and play our 100% every single time. If I had fed my feelings, if I had fed how I wanted to react, because if I wasn't feeling it, I didn't feel good, then I would never have been national champion and automatically qualified for world championships. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to bring you back to the training before then, because I was still struggling. And I don't want you to ever feel that 14 months is a realistic time for anyone to achieve a goal. It's possible. And again, that glass ceiling of time zones, we sometimes think it takes longer than us. But those training sessions were some of the toughest I've ever gone through. And I don't know how to eloquently explain it. So I want you to imagine waking up at 3:45 in the morning. It's pitch black. You can see your breath because my room didn't have heating. The only way I could heat my room was by lighting a fire and chopping wood in the lounge. I'd put on my thermals, my thermal gloves, my thermal hat, and put on a head torch. And as I run outside, all I can hear is the crush of the ground beneath me. It's a mixture of gravel or the grass crinkling in the dew and in the frost. And as I'm running with my head torch, I look up and I sometimes catch eyes watching me from the trees, because the possums are hanging there curiously watching a crazy human being out at this early time. They're not used to it. Very rarely did I ever see anyone on these races. I met a lot of kangaroos, possums, and I even saw a few iguanas. But humans were not usual. But I didn't want to be usual. As I finished my running around 6:30, I'd run inside, taking my clothes off as I run, jumping into the shower, grabbing a 2-3 minute shower, making myself something oaty, usually a smoothie with lots of nuts and berries and seeds to increase my macronutrients to start my recovery. I'd run upstairs ready for my breakfast shift. I'd make breakfast for all my guests, serving them barista coffee, making them the bacon and eggs that I wasn't eating in front of me, where I was smelling the aromas. And I'd sit around chatting with them. Something I learned as well was whenever I was busy, I got stressed. If I knew I had something to do afterwards, which invariably I did after the shift, because I either wanted to make the bedrooms because it was a guest house or get on my bicycle, I got anxious and stressed, and it would take longer, the operation, than if I relaxed. So whenever I felt anxiety build up, so for me, I notice in yourself where it is, but for me, it builds up into my chest and I start hyperventilating. I feel a tightness and restriction in my neck and my chest. I'd slow down and purposefully drag my heels. I'd make myself ask guests long questions, find out about their day, almost forcing myself punishfully to slow down. Far too often we live in the future. I was pushing myself to 10:30 in the morning, and then when I was there, I was thinking about 2 p.m. and it was always rush till later. But what are we rushing for? At the end of our life, I don't want to get there any sooner than I have to. So by enjoying the moments, I actually started to ground and center myself more. I found more balance in me. And actually that was great training for now. When I'm in workflow, when I'm working with clients or setting up contracts for larger organizations, sometimes I can be thinking about all the tasks that are arriving in front of me. Yet by focusing on the moment of now and taking precision and care and enjoyment in the activity I'm doing, I'm able to give more, deliver to a higher level as well, and not bring the future concerns into the present. They don't exist. So why am I, contaminating the moment of now? And so I do the same in my sport, in my work, in Australia. I'd make sure I'd always enjoy the moment. And if the future was looming, I'd do my best to slow it down and connect to myself. A lot of us humans, we're not in our moment, we're not in the present. We're anxious, as I said, in the future, or we're angry and resentment, dragging the past with us into the present as well. What's happening now? Look at yourself. Tell me, have you noticed how your feet are feeling? Are you hot? Do you feel any pressure in where you're sitting? What about your breathing? We need to start focusing in these moments now, because it's when we're in the present moment, that is when the magic happens. That's when we can be in this magic flow state, or in the zone we hear so often. So when we're running, or when I'm running, and I know I have 50 kilometers to run, I'm not thinking about the 50 kilometers or the 49th kilometer with anxiety. I'm enjoying the moment of now. I'm enjoying the one step in front of the other. I don't know if it's my first or 100th, but for the moment, I'm enjoying what I have. And if I feel pain, I'm able to connect with that pain and find out if it's a genuine tear of a muscle or a pull, or if it's just telling me that I need to readjust my posture, or I need to slow down, or maybe even speed up. So noticing more in the present, we're able to deliver more as well. So whilst I was competing in triathlon, I could also use the techniques I was using in work to connect to my moment, to connect to myself, to let go of the anxiety of what was waiting for me ahead, or the guilt of what poor results I did in the past as well. And it's interesting because, well, it's interesting that I say interesting a lot. And that's something I do with intention, because what I've noticed is something I didn't do before is something I used to do before is I took a lot of my life for granted. I walked around with assumptions, the filters of, I knew this street, I knew this road, I knew what I was going to see. I knew what that person was going to say as well. So these assumptions carried me around everywhere. And something I've integrated in my life recently is to bring interest and curiosity back. Because being curious around the world, I'm noticing so much more. I was unaware that certain flowers were growing on a path that I used to walk every single day. I didn't know that the LED streetlights cause shadows to go hexagonally laced. By bringing curiosity back, we're connecting to our inner child. We're able to think outside the box. We're able to bring more solutions and possibilities into our own life. So that's why I keep saying interestingly and curious, just to give you a backstory, that these little nuggets all add up into a massive life change. So as I was training, I realized that I needed to keep feeding these bigger and larger goals. It would be easy for me to stop and sit on my laurels. So as soon as I became world champion, I knew that I needed to do something bigger for my life. I was just given this amazing platform where my intentions had created my wish. I'd always wanted to be Ironman world champion, yet here I was long distance world champion. So for the non-triathletes of the world, there are 5 distances in triathlon. Ironman is the longest, long distance is the second longest. And I never got to compete in Ironman World Championships. The maximum I got was 10th. Yet for me, I knew that I'd reached my maximum capacity because I'd removed the glass ceiling. My possibility wasn't the best in Ironman, but it was the best in long distance. So I don't see my failing as a failing. I see it as me living up to my maximum potential. Yet I knew I needed to keep pushing myself. I didn't want to keep sitting on I'm an Ironman, I'm a long distance world champion, don't you know? I wanted to make sure that I lived my life with integrity, that I was a woman who kept applying, learning, developing, and growing. In business, we talk a lot about I think it's the lean product circle. You build something, you learn from it, and then you revisit it. So we build, learn, and measure. I needed to make sure that I applied this to my life as well. So after completing World Championships, I was able to revisit what was truly important in my life. I knew I needed an exit. I needed to get out of this toxic relationship because I was still legally contracted to my ex-fiance. And I also wanted to make sure that I kept giving back to the world. Because something interesting had also happened was by me being selfish, by me centering myself, by me being self-centered, I was able to give more to others. So imagine the wheel of a bicycle. By me being centered in the middle, I had a stronger and bigger capacity to serve more people. The wheel could grow larger, it could travel further distances and support bigger loads. It was as if I found a magic. If I put myself first, it meant other people would get more of me, more people I could serve. Looking back, when I was eating unhealthily, drinking too much, when I was not loving myself and doing everything for others, I had nothing to give at the end of the day. I felt depleted, drained, I felt resentment. And the next time my friends would ask for help, I most probably would have said no. But now that I was being self-centered, centering self and being selfish, I had more to give and I wanted my life to continue that way. So today I still look to strive. I'm still looking for how I can add more value into my life to keep me growing, to keep me learning and developing. Because today is the youngest I will ever be. And interestingly, it's also the wisest I've ever been. So now is always the time to start. I've got this massive knowledge and the youngest I'll ever be. So I'm looking always for ways to apply this into my life and keep moving forward. So after being world champion, I was given this platform. People were naturally attracted or drawn to the gold. It's very interesting, isn't it? On the Tuesday, I was Kate Strong. On the Sunday, I was Kate Strong world champion. To me, nothing had changed. Yet, for the outside appearance, because I'd won something, because externally I was being rewarded, now I had a platform. So I made sure I used the platform as a force for good. I talked not about the show and tell of Kate, though that is what I use as the context. I use it to inspire and empower others to be reflected in themselves. And this is my intention for you. Where in your life do you find that you've given up on an idea? Where potentially are you resentful or realizing that you're living beneath your capacity? What can we do today to put you back in your life, to reignite that flame, that purpose, that passion in you, and to give you permission to be selfish? Far too often in the world, being selfish is frowned upon. Yet to me, it's integral. If every person looked after themselves, we'd be a nation of massive health and we'd be a nation of supporting others. I believe that every being can thrive. We can all excel and achieve our goals without the detriment of our local environment, of the world at large, as well as society. And today, even more than ever, we're seeing that. We're seeing a virus that happened halfway across the world has impacted, as I said, every single person in the world. And there's a lot of fear and uncertainty around this. On a side note, energetically, fear is a very low or heavy energy. It doesn't allow possibility or creativity. When we're in fear, we release certain chemicals that create fight or flight in our body. We're actually chemically not able to think outside the box in fear state. So how can we today, regardless of what's happening out there in the world that's outside of our control, put us back in the driving seat, put us back in control of our bodies? Now, I'm not going to say if we are in a space of fear and concern for us to jump up into elation and joy. That's way too high. But what can we do that's micro, one step at a time, just like I did with regards to my self-love, from stopping to hurt myself, from eating issues, up until being able to look in the mirror with pride. What can you do today to make sure that we stop feeding the fear and we start feeding that world of possibility? Because in this moment of change, the world has created a vacuum where it is desperate for new leaders. We need people to stand up and lead a path out of this. The world doesn't want to go back to normal. I don't know about you. When I look back at the 9 to 5, the rat race, working in a job that wasn't close to my heart or close to my purpose, I don't want to go back to that. A lot more people are seeing value waking up and spending time with their children rather than the commute in their car. How about we use this at the new level? This is the new normal, and we build from here. Yet, who's going to be the architects of these new lives? You could be one of those. I could be one of those. So what in your heart, what gift do you have that you know the world needs? Now, when you're thinking about that gift, you could be filled with excitement, raring to go, or potentially concern and fear. The fear is valid. I want us to always allow whatever emotion we have, because as I was saying earlier, what we resist persists. So if we feel anxiety, allow that to be there. Send it. It sounds woo-woo, but please, I'm an engineer, so I'm allowed to speak a little woo-woo now and then. But if we feel anxiety, notice where it is in our body. See how it's responding. If you feel color or see color or feel temperature, or notice any word patterns. Because once we notice those things, we can see that as a flag. Now, these flags of anxiety, or maybe anger because we don't want to, or concern or fear, these flags are signals for us to say that we're stepping out of our comfort zone. And to me, those flags are wonderful. It shows that we're expanding our possibility, that our future will not be like anything we could have imagined, for the positive. When we expand, it's not comfortable. It's always going to be uncomfortable, hence the word out of our comfort zone. So notice these flags and see them as a sign that you're on the right path. There's a great book called The Obstacle is the Way. Your emotions could be your obstacle, and that is where you need to focus. What makes you feel uncomfortable, fidgety, awkward is actually what we need to embrace. If you could stand in the street and laugh and sing and make a fool of yourself and not care that people judge you or laugh at you, then you know you're in a position to move forward. I like to call it like a Teflon life. So nothing will stick on you. So people may laugh at you later on with your big dreams, yet it won't stick, it won't hurt you. Those arrows of hate or judgment will just glide by, and you can be left in action, in flow, in purposeful direction. So notice what you feel when you think of what future you want to design for yourself, for your family, for the community as well as for the world, because today we need more direction. We have no idea, as I keep saying, what will happen next week, let alone next year. So why not you be one of the many who's stepping up to define it too? There's beautiful ways to help too. There's always sort of people on paths. So I'll use again my example. After I became world champion, I found myself on a pedestal. I found myself feeling quite isolated and alone. Ironically, by me proving that I could be my best and the best, I felt even more isolated from others. And my perfectionism of being the best clicked in. I wanted to hide my concerns or fears. And if I ever expressed any worries about, oh, I'm not sure how I'm going to do next week, the response I got from my friends was, oh, you'll smash it, you're a champion, which made me feel even more alone. And so after the pinnacle of the highest peak I could have ever imagined in that moment, the pendulum swung just as deep into the darkness, where I found myself in October in 2015, back in my childhood bedroom in Britain. My parents weren't around, they were traveling away. So I was all by myself in a dark, wet, cold, gloomy house, feeling on top of the world, yet ironically, the loneliest and saddest I've ever been. For days, I'd lay in bed, feeling I had so much expectation of myself. I was living in the world of should, that I should be doing more, I should be delivering, I should be competing, I should be making better use of my time, that I was letting people down. You know, I was a champion, yet here I was feeling sad. Shame on me, Kate. And those thoughts consumed me. So the pendulum was in the darkness, and it's easy again to keep feeding those negative thoughts. Yet there's an old proverb, I think it's an African American story, that inside of all of us, we have a dark wolf, a black wolf, and a white wolf, a light wolf. The dark represents the hatred, the resentment, the regret, the judgment, and the light wolf represents the love, the community, the thriving. And they're always at battle, the dark wolf and the light wolf. And one day, a child asked his grandfather, well, who will win out of these two wolves? And the grandfather said, whichever one you feed. In that moment, I was feeding my dark wolf, and I didn't know how to stop feeding it. The spiral of decline had started even further. And whatever I said to myself, the meditations, I'd find myself crying, judging myself. I wasn't meditating long enough or good enough. I'd leave the house twice a week to a local cafe to get myself out of the house. And I'd watch people laughing, meeting their friends and hugging. And I'd be sitting again, feeling even more isolated, telling myself that, see, they've got friends, you don't. And I knew that this would continue unless something would change, and that change had to come from within. And so I dug deep. Ironically, before I dug deep physically, yet this time I needed to dig deep emotionally. I had the physical success. I could run a marathon every day if I wanted to. Yet inside, I felt my heart was breaking and I was alone. And so I did something that I knew I needed to do. I walked up to the corner, the cafe, and I saw the manager and I asked him for a job. At first, the manager looked me up and down and said, we don't have a position. And I responded, that's a shame for you, and sat back down. A few minutes later, the manager came back to me and said, what do you mean that's a shame for you? And I said, well, I'm just looking for a 0-hour casual job just to get me out of the house. I'll be your most loyal employee. All I want to do is just have a reason to come to the cafe a few more times a week. And so my first job in 2015, knowing that I've got a double master's in engineering, I speak 3 languages fluently, I'm also age group world champion in triathlon, was cleaning toilets in a Costa shop. I wasn't allowed to serve clients. I wasn't allowed to make coffee. All I had to do was clean the toilets and clean the storeroom. And that's what I needed to do. And that's all I wanted to do in those moments, because it reaffirmed in my heart that whatever we do outside, we can be the greatest in ourselves. So I was a world champion toilet cleaner. Sounds a bit ridiculous when I say it, but I made sure that everything I did was to my highest level, my 100%. I would be my best in whatever external environment I created. And then that's what happened. The managers started to notice that the toilets were cleaner than usual. The stockroom was more ordered than usual. And my shifts from being a few hours a week grew to 5 hours a day. And he recommended me to one of his friends who doubled my salary from the minimum wage to double the minimum wage. And then one of his friends recommended me to a guy who owned a chain of pubs who was struggling with health and safety. And again, my salary was doubled again. And so even without me saying a word, by me not begrudging toilet cleaning, by me not playing the don't you think I should be better than this, I was able to keep my life expanding because I was being my best in everything I did. I didn't need to tell people who I was. I didn't need to show them my CV. My actions delivered my results. And far too often in life, we live like what we say doesn't matter. We say, yeah, I'll meet you at 10. Then 10 o'clock arrives, we forget. And we think a small apology will do that. We're forgetting what that person feels or says about us. What we say is the only thing people have to represent us. So if I say I'll be there at 10 or I'm going to be a world champion triathlete, I need to make sure that what I do, my actions, how I turn up, matches what I say. So if I say I'm going to do a good job or I'm going to meet you for coffee, I'm there. So that when I do set those strong or high visions and goals, I'm more likely to accomplish them. There's less wiggle room for people to judge me, for people to tell me it's not going to happen, and also myself. I've taught my brain to realize when I say something, I mean it. I don't verbally diarize everything. I say what I mean. I say what I want to accomplish, and I make sure my actions marry that, so that I'm teaching myself and I'm also allowing my friends to know that what I say is what I do. Now, I'm not perfect, as I'm learning regularly, but whenever I make a mistake, I do my best to apologize for it or learn from my mistakes to make sure it doesn't happen. But look in your lives as well. If you say you're fit and healthy, tell me, what was the last meal you ate? Did you go for a run this week? Or did you do any activity? Because you're saying one thing, we've got to make sure that we match it the other side. And with this attitude of making sure that I am what I say I am, it's allowing me now to grow bigger and bigger. And it's also allowing me to teach other people too. Because life isn't lived in a little cave. It's very easy for Buddha, who lives in a cave, to say he's found enlightenment. Yet put Buddha in a busy street with kids screaming, with children running around, your partner asking questions from you, and your parents calling you every day, then we'll find out if he's enlightened. But if we make sure that we live with this goal of putting ourselves first, of knowing the words no doesn't mean that I don't love you. It just means that today it's for me. And yes, I'm actually going to deliver it, rather than saying yes and hiding away. I'm able to stand into my power. I'm able to be a woman and a girl where people know what they're going to get from me. I don't have many friends, but the friends I have, they know I have their back. So it's about making sure that we live this beautiful world that puts us in our world first. So I'm giving you permission today to do that. Even if you've got children, especially, let's show a child what living a purposeful life is. And also making sure that you live to your soul's intention. I was interviewing Luke earlier today, and he talked about this diet that he follows with his communities around the world that have lived to over 100 plus years. Now, what they eat is important, yet for me, how they eat is even more interesting to me, because each one of the communities talked about in Italy, in Greece, and Japan, they eat in a family, they eat in a community. They sit down, they're nourishing each other's souls with laughter, with humor, with hugging, with tears of joy, with tears of sadness. They're nourishing their life with story and community. We don't want to live life in our little box all the way up until we get into another little box. Let's live life of abundance and full of color and personality. And let's find our own place within that. So if I'm turning up as Kate Strong trying to be Tracy, it's not going to work. We already have a Tracy. How about I turn up as Kate Strong and you turn up as you, and everyone turns up as themselves? We can all contribute and continue to a much higher level. So I wanted to share with you as we come to a draw, because I've been talking for a long time about my future goals. So today I have a great business that I'm loving. I coach individuals to remove the glass ceiling off their potential. So I work with people ready to stretch and grow, but are finding there's some sort of block. Sometimes it's external. So we need to talk about factors that are challenging them outside of themselves. But a lot of the time there's inner blocks. There's self-belief, there's blocks around being able to overcome procrastination and fear of failure, as well as fear of success. I also work with businesses and helping them get on the sustainability bandwagon to create a profitable business that's also for the people and the planet of the world that the business serves. Yet, I also need to make sure that I keep stretching myself personally. And I thought, I'm always for, publicly holding myself to account. So I'll use this platform, this webinar, as the case. So later this year, I'm going to be attempting a world record. I've already attempted this record before, and guess what? I failed. I did not accomplish it, and I decided to shelve it. Yet that little thing in my mind has still been burrowing away for 3 or 4 years, thinking I can do it again. So in the end of October, November time, I'm going to attempt to cycle for 24 hours on a static bicycle and be the world's first female to finish that. So if you are interested in following my journey, then please get in touch. I'd love you to join Team Strong in some capacity, because I'll need remote support, ongoing support, cheerleaders, nutritional support, any type of friendly advice. And also, if you think that it's a crazy idea, then please also let me know what, because I can then upskill to answer your questions more with validity. And the reason I'm doing this challenge is because in 2022, which is 2.5 years' time, I want to cycle across America. There's a race called Race Across America, RAAM, which is 3,100 miles, which is just over 5,000 kilometers. I want to be the first female finisher for that. So we're looking at cycling 3,100 miles in under 10 days. So the reason I choose these goals is because I'm scared. I have no idea how I'm going to cycle for 22 hours a day, 22 hours a day for 10 days straight, off 2 hours of sleep a night. Yet, isn't that the point of life? I don't want to stay in my comfort zone. I want to end this not with a perfect body. I want to end this with bruises and cuts and stories and, missing bits of hair or sleepless nights. I want to end this with a beautiful way of finding how far I can actually go. So this is all the training to see how far how I can get ready for RAM, which is that cycle race. So I'm asking you guys as well, what goal do you have in your life that you're currently aiming for? And what excuse are you giving yourself to not strive for it too? So I really want you to reflect on that, put it in the comments, because we can hold ourselves account to that. And thinking something is not as powerful as saying it, and saying it is not as powerful as sharing it, and sharing it is not as powerful as writing it, and writing it is not as powerful as doing something about it. So create that goal, write it down, and start taking the first steps today to make it happen. Again, climbing Everest doesn't take a day. It takes years of one step at a time. We're not in a rush. The world will be there tomorrow, fingers crossed, and we will be there too. So let's enjoy the journey, keep moving forward and striving, and making sure that we leave the world a better place, and we leave it smiling, knowing we've lived every single moment to its fullest. So on that note, if you would like to get in touch with me, my name, as I said, is Kate Strong, and please check out my website, katestrong.co.